Okay, let's dive in. Today, we're getting into a story that's, well, it's really fascinated and honestly probably frustrated people online for, what, over 20 years now?
Oh, definitely. It's the John Titor story.
Exactly. This person who just appeared out of nowhere online claiming he was a time traveler.
Yeah, it's such a strange and compelling online mystery. This guy pops up in chat rooms, forums.
Yeah.
This was back in November 2000.
Right.
Says he's a soldier military guy from the year 2036. Talks to people, answers questions, makes predictions.
Even just vanishes.
Just gone. By March 2001, he stopped posting. Like poof.
And a lot of what we actually know or think we know about him comes from one main source, right? Oliver Williams.
That's right, the editor of JohnTator.com. He saw these posts scattered across the internet and thought, hang on, this is
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
He compiled them, preserved them. His site really became the go-to place. So for this deep dive, we're really leaning on his work, the materials he gathered.
Okay, so our goal here, our mission for this deep dive, is to unpack what Titor actually claimed. You know, who he said he was, what his mission was about, the tech he described.
The predictions, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
And maybe try to figure out why this story still gets people so fired up, why it keeps sparking debates even now.
Sounds good. So let's start with the basics. Who did John Titor claim to be?
Well, like I said, a soldier from 2036. But he wasn't just, sightseeing in the past.
Yeah.
He was very clear. He was on a military mission, a specific one.
Okay, a military mission from the future. That sounds pretty big, like stop World War III kind of big.
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But this is where the story gets quick.
Yeah.
Well, really specific and kind of weird. And it's a part Oliver Williams found really interesting.
What was it?
His main goal, his prime directive, was to go back to 1975
Okay.
to pick up a computer, an IBM 5100 portable computer.
Wait, an IBM 5100 from 1975? Why? Why would someone from 2036 need a, museum piece?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's a key point for people who think the story might be real. Titor claimed that in his time, 2036, they were hitting major snags with their big mainframe computer systems. Debugging problems, compatibility issues.
And an ancient IBM was the solution? How?
According to him, yeah. This specific model, the 5100, had this unique ability. It could understand and natively program in a couple of old languages, BASIC and APL.
Okay.
Apparently, their super advanced 2036 computers couldn't easily do that, or interface with some legacy systems without it. So the 5100 was like a Rosetta Stone, almost. The debugger for old code on new machines.
That is incredibly specific. Did that check out? Was that true about the IBM 5100?
Well, this is the kicker. Oliver Williams points out that after Titor vanished, some IBM engineers actually came forward.
Yeah.
And they confirmed it. They said, yes, the 5100 did have this sort of hidden, undocumented feature. It could handle those languages just like Titor described.
Mm-hmm.
And hardly anyone knew about it back then.
Wow. Okay.
Well,
That's not something you'd just guess, is it?
not easily, no. It definitely lends the story some weight for a lot of people. It's a very specific, verifiable, technical detail he got right.
Did he say why he was chosen for this mission? Any personal link?
Yeah, he did mention that. He claimed his grandfather was actually one of the engineers who worked on the IBM 5100 project.
No kidding.
Yep. Said that family connection was part of the reason he got the assignment to go back to 75.
So it tied into his own family history, too. That adds another layer. And this whole idea needing old tech for new problems, it's not completely crazy, is it?
No, not entirely.
Yeah.
Oliver Williams mentioned this too, drawing parallels. Like you hear about NASA sometimes having to hunt down old computer chips on eBay
Right.
for the space shuttle or older probes because you just can't get them anymore, but they're critical.
Right. Or needing some ancient adapter just to connect two things. Okay, so that part of the mission, getting the old computer, maybe isn't as far-fetched as it first sounds, but the time machine itself, how did he say that worked?
Right, the actual mechanics. He gave details there too. The basic principle, he said, was about manipulating gravity, really intense gravitational fields.
Okay, manipulating gravity. How?
Get this, with mini black holes. Tiny black holes created in a lab, captured, and used as the engine, essentially.
Mini black holes in a lab. Back in 2000, that must have sounded like pure science fiction.
Oh, absolutely, pure sci-fi. But here's another one of those points that Oliver Williams found really striking. Titor made a specific prediction about this.
About the black holes?
Yeah. Late 2000, early 2001, he said that CERN the big particle physics lab in Switzerland.
Yeah, the LHC.
Right. He predicted that CERN would announce plans by the fall of 2001 to start experiments aimed at creating mini black holes.
Okay, and did they?
Well, according to Oliver's research and the timeline he compiled, in September 2001, CERN did make announcements about upcoming experiments at the LHC that included searching for evidence of, or potentially even creating, microscopic black holes.
Oh, the timing lines up pretty closely then.
It does. And for Oliver and others following the story, that correlation was, well, it was pretty compelling. Hard to just wave away.
Another very specific sort of technical prediction that seemed to pan out, at least in terms of announcements. What did the machine supposedly look like? Did he describe it?
Yeah, he described the main unit,
Mm-hmm.
said it was about the size of a large suitcase, packed with the mini black holes, gravity sensors, computers, all the gear.
Did he show anything? Pictures?
He did. He posted some photos and drawings online, said they were from the manual. There's this one technical schematic. Nobody's ever been able to definitively say what it is or where it came from.
So there are actual visuals connected to his story.
Mm-hmm. And the machine, he said, could travel forwards or backwards. But there was a limit.
A limit.
Yeah, roughly 60 years in either direction. So
Yeah.
you couldn't use it to, say, go back and see ancient Rome or jump thousands of years into the future, just about a 60-year window from your present.
Interesting constraint. Did these ideas, gravity manipulation, mini black holes, did they have any impact beyond just forum posts?
It seems like it. Oliver mentioned that someone apparently tried to file a patent based on Titor's descriptions of how the machine might work.
Really? A patent?
Yeah, suggests the ideas weren't just dismissed out of hand by everyone. They sparked some actual, technical thinking. And Oliver also points out something else significant.
What's that?
That years after Titor was gone, serious scientists, physicists, started discussing theories of time travel that involved, well, alternate realities and manipulating gravity. Concepts very similar to what Titor had been talking about back in 2000.
So ideas that sounded wild back then are now part of the theoretical physics discussion.
More so than they were, yeah. Oliver sees that as a big point. Maybe Titor wasn't just making it all up.
Okay, that's definitely food for thought. Now let's get into maybe the trickiest part. His theory of how time travel actually functions? It wasn't like in the movies.
No, not at all like H.G. Wells or Back to the Future. This is central to his whole story. He said time travel isn't moving along your own timeline, forwards or back.
What is it then?
It's more like slipping sideways into a nearby different reality, an alternate timeline that's very close to yours, but not identical. He used an analogy like standing in a room full of mirrors. The machine lets you step into one of the reflections.
So every time you travel, you're essentially jumping to a parallel universe, a slightly different version of history.
Exactly. You're leaving your world line and arriving on a new one.
Okay, that changes everything. What are the implications of that?
Two huge ones. First, it means time travel is basically a one-way trip, in a sense. You can jump again, but you can't easily get back to the exact world line you started from. Each jump puts you somewhere new.
Right, you can't just rewind your own life.
Yeah.
And the second implication.
It makes proving you're a time traveler incredibly difficult, maybe impossible.
How so?
Think about it. If you make a prediction and it comes true here, skeptics say coincidence or you being here caused it. If your prediction fails, you just say, oh, well, it happened that way in my timeline, but obviously this one is slightly different.
Ah, it's a perfect explanation for any inconsistencies, isn't it?
It really is. And it directly addresses that big question everyone asks. If you're from the future, why didn't you warn us about major disaster, like 9/11, for example?
Right. What was his answer to that?
His rule, based on this alternate reality model, was that he couldn't give information to prevent what he called death by probability. Trying to stop a big event, even a terrible one, in this reality could have unforeseen, possibly worse consequences down the line here.
Like the butterfly effect, but across timelines.
Exactly. The source material mentions him using the example of, say, warning Pearl Harbor. Preventing that attack might seem good, but maybe it keeps the U.S. out of WWII longer, and in that timeline, maybe Hitler gets the atomic bomb first. You just don't know the ripple effects.
So some things, maybe even bad things, have to play out.
According to his theory, yes. Interfering is too risky. It's a heavy idea.
It really is. So if you can't really change history or reliably predict the future of the timeline you land in, what's the point of time travel under this model?
Well, the most practical use becomes retrieving things, information or physical objects from other timelines that you need in yours.
Which brings us right back to his mission.
To get that IBM 5100. It fits perfectly with his own theory of how time travel works and what it's useful for.
It all seems to tie together, the mission and the physics. And again, Oliver Williams emphasizes that these concepts, Titor discussed alternate realities, gravity manipulation, they're being talked about more seriously now in physics than they were in 2000.
Yeah, which, if you lean towards believing, suggests he might have had some access to, future knowledge, or at least future theoretical frameworks.
Definitely intriguing. Okay, let's shift focus from the how to the what. What did Titor say life was like in his future in 2036?
The biggest single factor shaping his world was a war. World War III. He said it started around 2015. Yeah. He described it as devastating, but relatively short in terms of the main conflict. The real toll, he said, came afterwards. He estimated about 3 billion people died globally, mostly from disease, starvation, the breakdown of society after the fighting stopped.
3 billion people, that's almost unimaginable. How did that change things in the U.S.?
Radically. He described America in 2036 as much more. Decentralized, more rural. Communities were smaller, tighter knit. People relied heavily on their families, their neighbors.
Because the larger structures had broken down.
Seems so. He said there was much less focus on things he saw as kind of frivolous in our time, like, celebrities, mass media, consumerism. Survival and community were paramount.
He must have looked at our world, the world of 2000, and found it incredibly strange.
He definitely did. He commented on it. He seemed genuinely puzzled, maybe even a bit dismayed by how self-absorbed or unaware people seem.
In what way?
He told a story, apparently, about seeing someone stranded, needing gas by the road. He wanted to stop and help immediately, but his parents, our time parents he was staying with, were hesitant, worried about safety, inconvenience.
Right.
And that hesitation, that lack of immediate community support, seemed really alien to him. He felt the sense of duty, like everyone was potentially important, connected.
That little anecdote really paints a picture of a different mindset. What about the military? He was a soldier, right?
He was, but he didn't seem to have much love for the military as he saw it in 2000. The large, hierarchical, secretive structure.
How is it different in 2036?
He said it had been reformed, presumably after the war. And here's a fascinating detail. Time travel tech. Not a secret in 2036.
Really? Not classified?
Apparently not. He suggested it was known, and that civilian access was expected fairly soon, which is a world away from how military technology is typically handled now.
Wow. Civilian time travel. That's a very different future. Okay, let's get to the part everyone always focuses on, the predictions. This seems to be the make or break area for most people.
Absolutely. This is where the debates get really heated. He made several specific forecasts for the years between, say, 2001 and 2015.
And the big one.
The biggest, most controversial was his prediction of a second American Civil War. He said it would start with growing civil unrest around 2004, 2005,
Okay.
escalating into actual, shooting and fighting by 2008.
But that didn't happen. Not in the way we think of a civil war, anyway.
Correct. No large-scale conventional civil war broke out in the U.S. during those years. And that's, understandably, the biggest piece of evidence skeptics point to. See? He was wrong.
How do believers explain that? Does the source material offer interpretations?
It does. Oliver Williams outlines some of the arguments you hear. Could civil war have meant something else, like intense political division, maybe conflicts related to immigration? Some wondered if he misspoke. Maybe he meant the conflict in Iraq, which heavily involved the U.S. military around 2008.
So reinterpreting the term civil war.
Yeah, or questioning if our definition is too narrow. But it's undeniable, the straightforward prediction of a U.S. civil war starting then, it didn't manifest as expected in our reality. It's a major sticking point.
What else? He mentioned the Y2K bug, didn't he?
He did. He said Y2K was a serious problem in his original timeline, caused significant disruptions, unlike here, where it's mostly a non-event.
So why the difference?
Well, the source mentions some speculation. Could Titor's trip back to 1975, getting that IBM 5100, which could handle old code, could that have somehow altered our timeline? Maybe inadvertently fixing or mitigating the Y2K bug here.
A potential butterfly effect from his mission itself. Interesting thought. What about the Olympics?
He predicted no Olympic Games after 2004.
Also wrong, obviously. The games continued.
They did. Though, Oliver's material notes that believers sometimes point to the political tensions and talk of boycotting the 2008 Beijing Olympics as maybe a faint echo, a near miss. It's a stretch for most, I think.
Yeah, seems like reaching. So, okay, major predictions like the Civil War and Olympics seem pretty off. But proponents say he did get some things right.
They do. The sources Oliver compiled list several examples people cite. Things like The failure to find WMDs in Iraq after the invasion,
Okay.
China's space program advancing, putting an astronaut in orbit,
Hmm.
ongoing problems with the U.S. space shuttle program, which sadly proved true.
Right.
Um, Stephen Hawking apparently changing his mind later about whether black holes, even mini ones, could radiate energy. The growing impact of mad cow disease or prion diseases, concerns about erosion of civil liberties or constitutional rights.
Hmm.
And significantly for some, he talked about using viruses to fight cancer, which is
Right.
now a real area of medical research, virotherapy.
So a mix of geopolitical, scientific, and social trends that people feel he alluded to or predicted correctly. What about that poem, The Soldier's Winter?
Ah, yes. That one's very specific and quite curious.
Yeah.
Back in 2000 or 2001, Titor quoted a few lines from a poem, said it was called A Soldier's Winter, and that it was well known among soldiers in his time.
Okay.
Then several years later, around 2005, a real U.S. soldier did write and publish a poem, titled A Soldier's Winter, and it contained lines very, very similar to the ones Titor had quoted years earlier.
Whoa, that's eerie. Coincidence.
Or did Titor's post somehow plant the seed? Did the soldier see it, consciously or unconsciously, and it influenced his writing?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Exactly. And Oliver points this out. It perfectly highlights the problem with proving time travel under Titor's own rules. Was it genuine foreknowledge? Or a self-fulfilling prophecy triggered by the prediction itself? You can argue it either way. It's impossible to definitively prove based on the correlation alone.
It leaves you hanging. Now, the elephant in the room for many, 9/11. He was posting right before it happened. Did he say anything?
Well, direct warnings were supposedly forbidden by his death by probability rule. He even used plane crashes as an example of something he couldn't specifically warn about to prevent loss of life.
So no direct warning. Any hints?
The source material suggests maybe some subtle, indirect things. There was this odd call to the Art Bell radio show back in 1998, years before Keter, from someone claiming to be a time traveler named John, who mentioned New York City looking similar in the future, but missing a prominent skyscraper.
That's strange.
And Titor himself, again, specifically used the phrase plane crash when explaining his rules. Oliver's take is that maybe he was hinting, left-handedly, doing what he could within his self-imposed limits. But no smoking gun, no explicit warning.
So constrained by his own rules, perhaps. Let's shift away from the heavy predictions. What about his personal life during his stay? Where did he live?
He claimed he stayed with his family, his parents, in Florida initially.
His 2000-era parents.
Yeah. And get this, he said he even met his younger self. He would have been, what, 2 or 3 years old then?
Wow. How did they explain him?
He said his parents just told the coddler he was Uncle John visiting. He also mentioned he used his parents' computer to make his online posts.
Living under the same roof as your infant self? Sounds
Yeah.
mind-bending. Did the story just stop when he stopped posting?
No, not really. It kind of took on a life of its own. The source mentions a lawyer, Larry Haber, who surfaced later.
Okay.
Haber claimed to represent Titor's family after they supposedly moved. This led to things like the John Titor Foundation, a published book compiling the posts, even talk about a movie deal at one point.
Does that muddy the waters? Make it seem like a grab for money?
For some people, yes. Oliver Williams acknowledges that this later phase can feel a bit commercialized, raises questions about motives. But he also kind of wonders aloud if maybe it's just another weird, perhaps badly handled part of the whole ongoing story. Hard to say.
What about practicalities? He had this suitcase-sized device. How did he move it around?
It wasn't just the device, it needed a vehicle. He said for the 1975 part of the mission, he used a car from that era, a 1966 or 67 Chevy Corvette.
A classic Corvette. Why that?
Fit the time period, obviously. But also, he said it had a strong frame, good suspension, suitable for carrying the unit. Apparently, he was a bit surprised by how much attention the car attracted back then.
I bet. And in 2000, 2001.
He'd switched to a Chevy truck, 4-wheel drive. Again, practical for carrying the equipment.
So vehicles chosen for function, fitting the era. Did he ever explain his military insignia, the logo seen in some photos?
We did, yeah. It was sort of abstract, with curved lines. He said the lines represented the distortion of gravity the field the time machine created.
Okay.
And within that field, there were 2 paths shown. A solid line, representing the intended trajectory through time, and another line kind of jagged and off-center. He called that the path to God.
The path to God. What did that mean?
It represented the inherent inaccuracy, the unpredictability. You aim for the solid line, but you might end up on the jagged one. Time travel wasn't perfectly precise. There was always this element of chance or fate built right into their understanding and even their logo.
That's Surprisingly philosophical for a military text symbol. What was Titor like to interact with online? His style.
From the posts Oliver compiled, he comes across as pretty direct. Stern, maybe. Not fluffy or vague. Straight to the point.
Handled silly questions okay.
Seemed to. He had ways of deflecting things he thought were trivial without being totally dismissive. Like someone asked him who'd win the Super Bowl that year.
Yeah. What'd he say?
He didn't just give a name. He supposedly replied asking the person if they could remember if it rained in New York City on a specific date back in, 1932.
Huh. What was the point of that?
Kind of a clever way to say the future isn't perfectly knowable or details get fuzzy,
Yeah.
but also maybe a sly hint. The team that did win the Super Bowl that year was the New York Giants.
Oh. So maybe a subtle clue hidden in the deflection. He clearly liked engaging, but on his own terms. Now, Oliver Williams mentions something striking: the extreme reactions the story provokes.
Oh, absolutely. He says it's one of the most fascinating things about it. The polarization is intense.
How so?
He gets everything. Angry emails, people accusing him of running a hoax, sometimes even threats.
Seriously? Death threats?
Apparently, yes, from people furious about the story being spread.
Yeah.
And then, on the other end, he hears from people who are completely convinced. They're prepping,
Time?
stockpiling food, moving to the countryside, getting ready for the future Titor described.
Wow, it really pushes people's buttons one way or the other.
It really does.
Odd.
Oliver finds the amount of sheer energy people pour into either debunking it or believing it just.
Yeah.
Remarkable, especially after all these years.
It's clearly tapped into something deep. Has the name John Titor itself kind of entered the language?
To some extent, yeah. Oliver
Yeah.
mentioned seeing it pop up as a reference point now and then, like in discussions about time travel hoaxes or internet legends. He even saw a DVB review for Star Trek use Titor, almost like an adjective, shorthand for this kind of mysterious, maybe real, maybe not time traveler figure.
It's definitely made its mark. Okay, let's loop back to Oliver Williams himself. After curating all this material for so long, what's his personal take? Does he believe it?
He spent years collecting, verifying, sharing the posts. He's pretty open that his own belief goes back and forth.
Understandable.
He admits he's genuinely personally shaken sometimes by the connections. The IBM thing, the CERN prediction lining up, the later physics discussions. Those moments give him pause. He finds them hard to explain away easily.
So, after all this, what would it take for him? What would fully convince Oliver Williams that John Titor was the real deal?
He was asked that. He said for him, the absolute clincher, the thing that would make him say, okay, I'm sold, would be if CERN. If CERN eventually announces they haven't just created mini black holes, but they've captured them and figured out how to use them technologically. Just like Titor described as the power source for his machine.
That specific development.
Yeah. He feels that would be too specific, too improbable a hit to be anything but real.
That's a clearer benchmark. Something you, the listener, can even keep an eye on in science news, I suppose. So let's bring it back to the listener. Why does this story stick around? Why do we still talk about it?
I think it hits on really fundamental things, doesn't it? Time, reality, destiny, free will.
Yeah.
Can we change the past? Do we want to know the future? What counts as proof for extraordinary claims?
It forces you to think about how you evaluate information, especially weird information.
Exactly. You've got these weirdly specific details that seem to check out, like the IBM thing. Then you have major predictions that clearly didn't happen here. How do you weigh that? How do you make sense of the correlations versus the misses? It's a mental workout.
It really is. And if you, listening, are intrigued and want to go deeper, read the original stuff. Where should you go?
The main place, the one Oliver Williams runs, is johntitor.com. That's where the compiled posts are, the pictures he shared, analysis, timelines. It's the central archive, really.
Definitely worth checking out to see his actual words in context. Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive into the strange, compelling, maybe frustrating world of John Titor, here's a final thought for you to chew on.
Go for it.
If time travel does work the way Titor described it, not changing your past, but stepping into a different reality, does that change how you think about your own life, your choices? Are you ever really changing your future, or are you just constantly choosing which path to take in this huge, branching multiverse?
That's a big one. Something to definitely ponder.